As French, British and German NATO troops converge around Greenland, does the South China Sea offer a case study for the Arctic? But first, another not-so-subtle social media post has emerged. It portrays a choice for two Greenlandic dog sleds. Either choose the path to the US or choose a dark and undesirable future. It was posted by the official White House X account along with Donald Trump's Truth Social post, in which he repeats, "The US needs Greenland for national security. NATO should be leading the way for the US to get it. If we don't, Russia or China will." Now, the post came not long after the first face-to-face meeting between Newark, Washington and Copenhagen to discuss Donald Trump's desire to take Greenland, where no agreement was made other than to establish a working group for further discussion. After the meeting, the Danish foreign minister said this.
The discussions focused on how to ensure the long-term security in Greenland. And here our perspectives continue to differ, I must say. The President has made his view clear, and we have a different position. We, the Kingdom of Denmark, continue to believe that also the long-term security of Greenland can be ensured inside the current framework.
In relation to Trump's assertion that Chinese and Russian ships are everywhere around Greenland, Denmark says it has been a decade since the last Chinese ship was spotted near Greenland, located on the edge of the Arctic Circle. Trump, writing on social media, called on NATO to tell Denmark to get them out of here now. At the same time, he provided a Danish intelligence report from last month, which highlighted that China is preparing for a military presence in the Arctic. Analysts say Greenland is not about territory per se, but access. Now, to try to understand things better, if we take a look at a different sea, this time in the Indo-Pacific, can we see any parallels with the South China Sea in terms of sea lanes, resources, Chinese militarization and annexation that may offer us insight into Washington's concerns, as well as a playbook of what China, Russia and the US may do next in the high north? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by, from Washington, D.C., Mark Montgomery, retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral, Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Senior Fellow and Cyberspace Solarium Commission Executive Director. We also have in the studio Lai Yizhong, Prospect Foundation President, as well as Sana Hashmi, Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation Fellow. A very warm welcome back to the studio, both of you, and also to Mark from Washington, D.C. Thank you. NATO's Secretary General has interpreted Donald Trump's comments about Chinese and Russian ships like this.
Let's not be naive. Even if there are not that many ships sailing at the moment, we know that with the sea lanes opening up in the high north and the Arctic, and this is not only true for Greenland, this is true for the whole Arctic area. It's not only Russia active there, it is increasingly also China being active there. So when it comes to the Arctic region, we have to work together as an alliance.
And in a Nikkei Asian article, a Canadian diplomat said Trump viewed the Northwest Passage through the Arctic as akin to the Panama Canal, in which Trump said China controlled ports at both ends of the canal through Hong Kong-based Hutchison Port Holdings. So let me come to you first, Mark. In the Panama Canal case, the US said China has too much influence over a strategic choke point that is critical to US trade and national security, and so the US needs to take Panama Canal back. Does this help us understand the Arctic and Trump's desire to control Greenland?
First, I will say I can't explain Donald Trump's fascination with Greenland only because it goes back to his first administration. So it's been going on for 7 or 8 years. But I can tell you that the Arctic really has evolved into a decisive domain for a number of reasons, particularly over the last 6 or 7 years, as the melting ice has created opportunities for countries to take advantage of the critical resources and rare earth elements there. So first, much like the South China Sea, there are natural resources there. Greenland holds base metals, platinum, copper, lithium, and uranium. And because of the increasing temperatures and melting ice, it's more accessible. So there's some similarity. A second big issue in the Arctic is that it holds, by our U.S. geological surveys, about 13% of the world's undiscovered oil reserves, and then about 30% of the world's undiscovered conventional natural gas. So again, access to these resources, similar to the South China Sea, could drive countries' intentions. This melting ice is also creating the way for new sea routes. And so this is a little different than the South China Sea in that it was already applied waterway. These new sea routes, one of them, the Northern Sea Route, which runs along Russia's coast, and then the second, the Northwest Passage, which runs along the U.S.-Canadian coast. That Northern Sea Route, the one along the Russian coast, is open for passage already 2 to 3 months a year, pretty solidly, and that path cuts, more than 2 weeks off of a transit. So, again, a good opportunity there. Natural resources, improving sea routes. Many countries are going to become interested in this, and some of this bears a similarity to the South China Sea.
President Lai, bringing you in. So I just want to quote from the US's 2024 Arctic strategy. It says, Russia's Arctic capabilities and the potential to hold the US homeland and NATO allies at risk. So adding to everything that Mark has said, what in particular makes this waterway so strategic for the US homeland?
This is a critical area that the United States needs to have, so that especially from the missile, basically everything that when we talk about air defense, they pass through the polar areas, so that that makes it the Arctic and also the Greenland position will become very important. And second, just in addition to what Mark said about these three routes that become more important as the climate change effects become so severe, but even without those, the GIUK gap, that is the Greenland, Iceland, and the UK gap in undersea, that's another area that has the significant defense priorities in the Cold War. So that also plays the importance about Greenland.
Now, Sana, let's talk about the geography. We showed the maps at the beginning of the show. We can see very clearly at one end of this Arctic Ocean, is essentially a link towards China. Yeah, and then at the opposite end is obviously Europe through the GUK gap that President Lai mentioned. So do we actually need to shift our thinking of the Arctic Circle as being essentially, the single linchpin or the shortest now with the ice caps melting between Asia and Europe? Is it this that makes it such a decisive domain?
Absolutely, and I feel this is how we need to see this problem, and I think this is less about sovereignty and it's more about how this is being seen as a very important geostrategic corridor. And it's about control over excess, it is about control over rules. So I think it's, for the US, it's more about who comes first now. Now, US has to set the precedence. Of course, we have seen how the US and Trump administration 1.0 talked about it. But I feel that Mark also talked about the emergent maritime route. This is also one of the reasons. And also Trump talked about China and Russia being very present in the Arctic. So, of course, China is self-proclaimed near-Arctic state and Russia's presence is already there. But this is also about China and Russia. And, of course, the
and then cooperation.
And then cooperation, as in we have seen it during Ukraine war, we have been seeing in the Indo-Pacific, even the Eurasian region. But now if it is going to gap the geographical distance between Asia and Europe, so now it is going to link North America, Europe, and Asia. So, of course, the analogy that we talked about, the South China Sea, the Indo-Pacific, and Arctic, I think it's very much in the near future. It's not in far distance.
Okay, now let's take a look at the 8 Arctic nations looking down above the North Pole. Going clockwise from the top is Russia, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Greenland, Canada, and the United States, with the state of Alaska. Now, Russia is by far the largest player, controlling just over half of the total coastlines, with its northern fleet of over 70 nuclear submarines and warships, and operating more than 50 military installations, including air bases, radar stations and border posts. Now, let's take a look at the countries around the South China Sea. We have 7 nations: Taiwan, Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, Vietnam and China. While China does not have the longest coastline, that would be Vietnam. China uses the so-called 9- or 10- line to claim most of the entire sea, including parts of the 6 other countries' exclusive economic zones, or EEZs. Despite its sweeping claims being thrown out by the Permanent Court of Arbitration in 2016, China has actively expanded its military and economic activities within the 9-dash line, just as Russia has in the Arctic. Now, moving back to Greenland, the Arctic, and Donald Trump, the US president says this.
We have a very good relationship with Denmark, as you know, we'll see. But, we're doing the Golden Dome, we're doing a lot of things, and we really need it. If we don't go in, Russia's going to go in, and China's going to go in. And there's not a thing that Denmark can do about it, but we can do everything about it.
Mark, so just picking up on what Donald Trump said there, just very quickly, can you explain why Greenland is important for the US's Golden Dome, and also why China and Russia have criticized this project so much? At the same time, is there a parallel sort of early warning system for the South China Sea?
The president has made Golden Dome a significant part of his first budgets, and his national security strategy was emphasized defense of the homeland. So the Golden Dome aims to create a protective bubble or dome around the United States against incoming missile threats, conventional ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles. And to do that, we'll have a lot of equipment in space, but we'll also have a lot of equipment, what's called an underlayer, looking up with radars and with sensors and weapon systems. Those radars are forward stationed in a place like Greenland or Alaska or on the northern edges of Canada, which is called the Dew Line. These are important because that gives increased early warning and increased visibility in terms of the Greenland one to look into Russian launches for incoming missiles headed to the United States. These are going to get to us very fast, and our command and control centers would not have enough time without it. So we need it. Now, China and Russia don't like this because they say it's destabilizing on nuclear deterrence. It's the United States considering building an ability to strategically stop a nuclear attack, and instead of relying on the conventional mutual assured destruction. There's a lot of reasons why that argument probably doesn't hold water. This is really about conventional missiles, not ballistic missiles, and China is not willing to sign on to any strategic arms limitations agreements in any case. And finally, if I look at it versus the South China Sea, as you asked, there are really important early warning systems spread throughout multiple countries in the South China Sea. Japan has a very intricate, layered early warning system. Taiwan has a strong early warning system. The Philippines has good warning systems that the United States has provided them over the years.
Thank you, Mark. President Lai, again, I want to quote from the US's 2024 Arctic strategy. It says that China is focusing on the Arctic as a global commons in order to shift Arctic governance in its favor, and that non-Arctic states should contribute to the region's, quote, shared future for mankind. Also, its Polar Silk Road is about investments in the natural resources of the Arctic, also building infrastructure there, and it includes in the territory of some of these NATO allies. How would you compare China's interests and approach between the Arctic and the South China Sea?
Basically, China takes the South China Sea as 90% of the water is its own territory. So China, what they believe is, I'll exclude everything else. I'll just protect what is mine. And although I think that its legal claim does not hold in water. But in the Arctic issues, and right now China is looking for access and try to present itself as a near Arctic state, although it knows itself is not a Arctic state, but try to present itself as a near Arctic state. And the Chinese interest in the Arctic basically coming from two angles. The first one is that as the climate change shifts, makes it the northern route, the northern sea route, northwestern sea route that become available. And China started to look at as the possible solution for China to get away from the Malacca dilemma and everything else from coming from the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean and to China Sea, its coast. China wanted to explore different routes for the gas and the other the oil import. Another thing about it is that China also look at the Arctic as the possible Chinese influence to influence both the United States and the European. And then since year 2023, there's a tremendous increase in terms of China and Russia cooperations. And we see all kinds of different military and commercial activity associated with so, including some of Chinese ships that operate with the Russian to cut out the cable as well as the gas line that connecting Estonia and Finland and Estonia and Sweden.
So are you saying, in effect, China is treating the Arctic as if it was the South China Sea, which it claims entirely?
It's a little bit different. China knows itself it does not have the legal claim over anything, the territory in the Arctic, but it wanted to increase its access and also work with Russia in order to influence both the European countries and the United States as well as Canada.
Okay. Sana, can we draw any parallels? I mean, what we know about the South China Sea is that really early on, 1990s, perhaps even earlier, China already had a plan to take over this sea. It started to, so-called establish, fishing outposts, which it always had the plan to then develop and then militarize.
I think I would agree with President Lai here that in my view, it's not an exact replica of China's South China Sea playbook. Because if we look at the South China Sea, China is a resident power. So its tendencies are very coercive, revisionist. And if we look at it, the activities include gray zone activities, militarization, and intimidation. But then if we look at the Arctic, what China is doing, China is projecting a narrative that it is going there to use global common, and it is for the good of the world.
But is that what it's saying now? Give it 30 years, perhaps that changes.
Yeah, so I think
it change the facts on the ground like it did with the South China Sea.
Absolutely. So I think if you just look at it right now, it's just data collection and cooperation with Russia. And data collection supports future naval space and missile deployment. But then, we can't really talk about what is going to happen in the next 30 years.
Mark, bringing you back in, how about the alliance structures? For example, how does the first island chain in the Indo-Pacific, or even second, compare with essentially the NATO ally flank in the Arctic?
Well, I'd have to say there's a before Trump and after Trump to this, in the sense that for my 35-year career in the military, I would have seen any effort to undermine a NATO country like a Russian intervention or interference in Greenland as a cause for the United States and the rest of NATO to very aggressively act against Russia. But there has obviously been a change in how the president looks at this. President Trump looks at this versus his predecessors. But I would say traditionally, Greenland as part of Denmark has been treated as a key asset in NATO and one that must be defended by NATO. And in fact, NATO runs annual or biannual exercises, Operation Arctic Endurance, one of which is starting up this month with a number of NATO countries coming into Denmark for exercises. Different than that, in the South China Sea, the United States has bilateral alliances with Japan and Korea and the Philippines and Thailand, and then a partnership with Taiwan anchored in the Taiwan Relations Act. These are very different types of alliances, and they're very much bilateral. Recently, under President Trump, he's kind of treated all allies and partners consistently in a way that causes some discomfort.
Does it go across sort of both regions, though, Mark? I mean, does it appear that the US has relegated, the NATO or the EU allies to looking after, say, Europe, and he has elevated the Arctic Circle to be somewhere where he believes only the US can defend? However, Asia appears to be different. They are keen to invest and engage in the allies there. I mean, is it just proximity to the US homeland that we're talking about?
So I do think that the defense of the homeland is part of his increased interest in Greenland. Again, I can't account for all of it and for why just demanding that the Danes do more in Greenland is not enough. But certainly that proximity, that role in homeland defense does have a significant role.
President Lai, we have established that there are some parallels between the Arctic and the South China Sea or the Indo-Pacific. Sana said that we cannot talk now about 30 years in the future. What's your view on that? I mean, surely we can't rule out an Arctic where China has much more involvement. Perhaps, it has attempted to buy territory, isn't it, from some of the European states. That's been knocked back so far. Can we rule out that China might do something similar, grey zone followed by militarization, salami slicing, that sort of thing in the Arctic?
I think for China really want to do something similar to what they did to the state around the South China Sea. China need to work with Russia. China cannot operate by itself and go in there to intimidate everyone else in the Arctic. China right now does not have that kind of capabilities, that kind of projection power. You just look at the icebreaker that China has. Although China has more icebreaker probably than the United States, but the icebreaker, they are not nuclear powered.
But we're not talking about right now. We're talking about the future.
Yeah, but I have to say that 30 years, that's a very long time. And a lot of things can happen between now and then.
I think what we're trying to see is, all these reasons behind why Trump is acting like this with regard to Greenland. I mean, for the South China Sea, they've been accused of being asleep at the wheel.
I think the issue is more about that you look at Greenland, that's such a strategically important places, but you only have like 200 something people guarding them. So I think that's why all the controversy started to come out. If you don't do that, and I have to do that for myself.
You want to jump in?
So China does have objectives. China is shaping norms and narratives, but it doesn't have capabilities. And in the next 30 years, what is going to happen, we do not know. And objectives do not really account for actions.
Okay. Ahead of the January 14th meeting in Washington, D.C., Greenland's PM said this.
Grønland vil ikke ejes af USA. Grønland vil ikke styres af USA. Grønland vil ikke være en del af USA. Vi vælger det Grønland, vi kender i dag, og som er en del af kongeriget Danmark. Nu står vi med en geopolitisk krise, og hvis vi skal vælge mellem USA og Danmark her og nu, så vælger vi Danmark. Vi vælger NATO. Vi vælger kongeriget Danmark. Vi vælger EU. Tiden er ikke inde til interne diskussioner og splittelse. Tiden er til at stå sammen og få bygget videre på det fællesskab, vi kender, og til det, vi ønsker.
Sana, so Jens Frederik Nielsen there correctly said that Greenland is facing a crisis. Undeniable. But when it comes to the world, some analysts are saying this is not a crisis, this is a system change. And I think that goes to some of what you have been saying. Do you agree with that? And then does this then change our understanding of what Trump is doing in Greenland? Or is it, perhaps as you might think, simply an excuse for Trump's sort of imperialist, well, that's what it's been called, imperialist acts?
I think it's definitely a system change in a lot of ways. First, as in the year has just started, and we are grappling with issues such as Venezuela, Iran, and Greenland, and of course Taiwan, China is always a hot topic. And I feel what countries such as US, China, they're trying to do is to change the rules-based order that have been existing to better suit their interest. So, and this is just not about these countries, it's about other countries' preferences, interests, and approaches as well. And I feel this is
so you mean
very
the great
much
powers, or do you mean every country?
I think all the countries. You look at India, we are talking about emerging powers, we're talking about middle powers. I think all the countries are perhaps altering their foreign policy approaches in terms of what the US is doing. And US has done a lot in 1 year.
Okay. I just quickly want to get Mark's feedback, Mark's thoughts on this system change and how it affects, or whether it provides us with some insight into Donald Trump.
Well, I agree. It is a system change. And I really don't think it's about Greenland. It's about Trump. Trump has dramatically changed how the United States approaches things. I think it's very inconsistent with the previous 249 years of U.S. governance. And it's going to be a real struggle for our allies and partners to come along with us with such strategic instability. And so when you think about China and Taiwan, it's in the United States, it's been predicated on strategic ambiguity, not knowing exactly what the United States would do. Now it's strategic instability, not being able to predict what the United States would do. So I'm very worried about this. I think we saw a little bit of it in Venezuela. We saw it in Iran over the last few nights, where the president added gasoline to the fire of the protests and then took no action. And many protesters were then killed in the streets because of the increased activity. So from my point of view, this isn't about Greenland, it's about Trump. And we're 12 months into a 48-month term where I think we're going to see more of the systemic change and challenge.
President Lai, we've spoken about, obviously, the parallels between the Arctic and Indo-Pacific. So this is the crunch, isn't it? If there is a system change, Trump pushing to acquire Greenland, should this worry Taiwan, the Philippines, Japan? In the future, will there be a choice that countries like ours have to make? Will we be asked to give up territory?
Well, the systematic change is not just because of Trump, but also the other forces that enact Trump or they encourage Trump to do something. I have to say that the rule-based international order that currently we inherited is already broken in a lot of parts, including that for the country that violate the rules or ignore the rules, they did not go and they basically go unpunished. So that how to maintain these rules and how other smaller states that could believe that the rule will protect their interests. It seems to us that it has been selectively applied to. So for Taiwan, Philippines, and other countries, well, what we need to do is that we need to adjust to these renewed realities. We have to deal with China. That will be our primary threat. But also other countries that reacted to the United States as China, and their calculation toward Taiwan will also be different. So that is something that we need to calculate the secondary effects as well.
Okay, let's wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Lai Yizhong, Sana Hashmi, and Mark Montgomery online. Thank you so much for joining us. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.